All right. Hello out there in the Cotton Belt. It's another chilly hello here in mid January as colder temperatures sweep across the South and we settle in for actual real deal wintertime here for the foreseeable future. And that's good. It's good to have seasons. I'll tell you, while the temps have been dropping, the cotton industry spent the last week sitting on the Riverwalk there in lovely downtown San Antonio. That was as the NCC hosted another successful and very vital Beltwide Cotton Conferences. The industry kind of descended on San Antonio last week. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And we are also going to discuss a little news that we at Cotton Grower made of our own volition last week. That's when we unveiled our 2026 acreage survey results. We're going to talk about that. And we've also got a tremendous interview with Mr. Darren Hudson. He is an incredibly sharp economist with Texas Tech University, and he dropped in to talk about what is and what is not impacting the price of cotton as we look into a new year, namely tariffs, which take up so much of the oxygen in the discussion about what's happening on the farm. And Darren's given a presentation this year about how kind of unwarranted. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. So settle in, get yourself a warm cup of coffee. We got a big episode for you today. Okay, now welcome once again, and let's get right down to it. You may not know it, but this episode is coming to you a week late, and that's because yours truly was tied up with the industry happenings there in San Antonio at the Beltwide Cotton Conferences last week. I'll just say the Beltwide is not what it once was. It's not what it was 20 years ago. Some of you may recall that's back when producers would converge on the conferences en masse. And often courtesy of those seed companies, they'd get flown in and have a big time. And it was really more grower centric. It still got some stuff for growers, but the event now puts a greater emphasis on research and university researchers. But let me tell you, it is still quite important, quite vital for the industry. For my purposes, I spent most of that first day there with the consultants in the consultants conferences, and I was learning about all manner of new crop protection developments, of agronomic research that's gone on in the fields this past year, including something that was most interesting to me, this presentation that was given by a lot of the Southeast Extension folks about the jacid, that insect pest that's wreaking havoc across the Southeast and is easing westward, kind of reminiscent of a totally different arena, but kind of reminiscent of, to me, glyphosate resistance, how that's originated in Georgia and kind of eased its way west over the years. So be looking for that feature on that in the February issue of Cotton Grower Magazine. By the way, we'll have more on that. But there were also great presentations from economists, from industry association leads. Truly was something interesting going on at all times there in San Antonio. Massive kudos to Lauren Krogman and to the National Cotton Council for putting that event on. Now, last week, we also unveiled our much anticipated cotton acreage projection for 2026. And I want to talk a little bit about our number and the reaction to it here in a moment. But for now, we need to bring you an important message from this episode's supporting sponsor. That's Bayer and their Delta Pine brand cottonseed. Dr. Tim Dabbert, Bayer Cotton Product and Strategy Lead for Delta Pine, recently sat down with our own custom content editor, Hillary Wynn, and they discussed how Delta Pine is solving problems for producers during these challenging times. So we're going to bring you that custom interview right now.
Hi, I'm Hillary Wynn, Custom Content Manager at Maestro Media Worldwide, publisher of Cotton Grower Magazine. Joining me today to discuss the Delta Pine breeding program is Dr. Tim Dabbert. He serves as a cotton product and strategy lead for Delta Pine at Bayer. With 18 years at the company, Tim plays a key role in shaping product direction, ensuring growers have access to high-performing, reliable cotton varieties. His work focuses on aligning product strategy with grower needs and long-term market opportunities. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Hillary. I appreciate being here.
Tim, what is the Delta Pine breeding program and how does it impact the growers who choose to plant Delta Pine seed?
So the Delta Pine breeding program is really the heart and soul of varietal development. So our germplasm that we release on an annual basis. So the breeding program is spread. It's a network of breeders spread across the cotton belt. And they're really the ones in the fields looking at all the different varieties and products that they've created and figuring out which ones to advance from generation to generation before it gets to the commercial team where I step in and release those varieties to the public.
So the breeding program isn't just about genetics, but also meeting real world challenges for farmers.
Correct. Yeah, and that's why we're stationed throughout the Cotton Belt. We're looking at the challenges that the growers are facing. So whether we need genetics for West Texas, more drought tolerant type genetics, to genetics that work, on the East Coast that still have some dryland fit, but not nearly as dry as it is in West Texas.
So you mentioned that breeders are located across the Cotton Belt and work in the regions they breed the next set of genetics for. What does this mean for a Delta pine grower?
Yeah, so having breeders spread across the Cotton Belt working in those regions means that we're going to develop products specifically for those regions. Now, they're also, not only are they tested in those regions, but they're selected for, which means we're going to provide the best products we possibly can to fit that grower's needs. So we test across a number of different growers and really select those individuals that pass the test in those grower yield environments. And it really allows that grower to maximize his yield on his acre.
Can you share what sets the Delta pine breeding program apart from others in the industry?
Yeah, so I personally think we have one of the best breeding programs in the industry. And what sets us apart, I think, is our innovation. So it's whether we're trying to use as much genetic information as we can to, select the best candidates forward to go on to commercial, or the testing methods we use. So we're trying to go as fast as we can and be as accurate as we can. And you hear a lot about coming out of Bayer's that we're moving to what we call a precision breeding model. And then so that really allows us to not only select the best, but design the best. So using all the genetic information that we've captured, along with all the yield and fiber quality information that we've captured over the last, 110 years of plant breeding for Bayer, that we can put that into varieties and select and design those varieties to work on the grower's field.
So it sounds like Delta pine is really leading the way in terms of both performance and adaptability.
100%. We have a huge commitment to cotton. We're spending, millions of dollars every day on innovation, whether that's in our germplasm, whether that's in our traits that we launch to market. We are very much committed to cotton, and we're excited to bring new products forward.
So with that commitment to cotton, how does the Delta pine breeding program shape the future of cotton and bring innovation to the marketplace?
The Delta pine breeding program is responsible for 100% of the yield gains that we've seen throughout the 110 years of plant breeding. Our R&D organization also offers biotech traits, and I think that those help protect the yield, but it's really our breeding program that is setting up the yield advantages that each of our products have. So they're the heart, like I said before, they're the heart and soul, and they are the ones that are helping drive our genetics forward and ultimately release these great products for growers to use.
So what is next from a breeding perspective for Delta pine?
There's a lot of innovation coming. The team is working hard to see how fast we can bring new products forward. And really, one of the things we're focusing on now is, with all these new traits coming, biotech traits coming to the cotton market in the next couple of years, how do we make sure that we push yield through those trait transitions? I think every breeding program they've had a history of not advancing real greatly through those trait transitions, but we're coming up with new innovative ways to kind of push the boundaries of how we go from one trait to the next without losing yield. So we're excited to see what comes from them. And, they're always pushing the envelope with their innovation and coming up with new ideas, new models. We have a lot of good data scientists, quantitative genetics. They're all looking at the genetic information, pairing that with the field information, and really selecting the best products for our growers.
Where can our audience go for more information?
Bayer has a lot of unique resources. If you go to Bayer.com, you can search for plant breeding. You can search for the Delta Pine seed catalog, kind of see what we've just released this past weekend in their class of 26, and then all the innovative ways breeding is coming up with those new classes for the future.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you, Hillary. I really appreciate the time.
Okay, a big thank you to Dr. Tim Dabbert of Bayer and to our custom lead, Hillary, for bringing us that interview. Now, as I alluded to earlier, we released our annual acreage survey results just last week. We did it right before the Beltwide Cotton Conferences. That is our tradition over the years. We released that number. We like for it to be kind of released on the floor of the actual event, was how we had done that through the years. A little bit of a kink in the program this year because we are going to be late hitting mailboxes. Normally that issue is hitting mailboxes that first week of January, and it's actually not going to be hitting mailboxes across the belt until this week, until around the 14th or 15th. So we had to decide how to do it. I wound up just publishing the number on our website at the start of the Beltwide Cotton Conferences. I'll tell you, just to give you a little peek behind the curtain, I personally start getting pinged with emails and occasionally texts from industry economists and the merchant community immediately after the new year each year. And they all want to know when we're going to release that number. They want to know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Can I just tell them what the number is? So I love interacting with that slice of our audience, the economists and the merchants, but it's always just a reminder that, this thing that we put out, it does carry a little weight. And mostly it's important by virtue of just being the very first acreage projection. It's kind of serves as a bellwether for the state of the industry going into each production year. And given the state of things, given the challenging state of prices and input costs, I think there were a lot of people who were quite interested in what our number was going to reveal. There may have been some people who were nervous about what our number was going to say about how producers are feeling about cotton going into next year. So for those of you who have not seen your January issue of Cotton Grower, there is a detailed breakdown of how we arrived at our projection there. We are projecting 9,005,000 acres of cotton in the U.S. in 2026. That's upland and ELS. By the way, you can find this full feature on our website at cottongrower.com if you want to learn more about how we arrived at that number. That is a very marginal 250,000 acre decrease from final USDA tallies of the 2025 crop plantings. USDA revised their number in August and September of 2025 for crop plantings. And I think the last number they put out in September was 9.3 million acres. So our number going into next year, just marginally under that at 9 million, almost 9 million flat. It's very important to note that we conducted our survey between mid-November and mid-December is when we were asking growers and other industry stakeholders to participate in this survey. And as always happens, immediately after I wrapped up doing all that math and I wrote the story for our January issue, two major developments happened. The first, China announced that they were reducing plantings in 2026. And then within a day of that, the USDA released details of their Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, including the minor detail that $117.35 would be allocated for each cotton acre planted in 2025. That is a figure that would undoubtedly encourage more acres being planted than what we had captured, the sentiment that we had captured the month before that announcement was made. So, as always, things change. That's the problem. The fundamental problem of being the first out of the gate with an acreage projection is there's 4 months of things that are going to happen before the first seed gets planted. So I would encourage you to keep your eye on the National Cotton Council's projection, which they release in March. I suspect it's going to be a smidge higher than what we've put out. In terms of what we heard from our audience, one major theme sort of repeated itself from state to state across the country, and that is that our farmers made a heck of a good crop in 2025 in a lot of different places, not just one geography. I mean, across the belt. We heard from especially extension agents who said, hey, my guys hit it out of the park with the crop that they made this year. But because prices being what they were, they barely broke even. So there were different regional factors that weighed into account. The JACID that I mentioned earlier in the Southeast is going to impact some acres. Competitive crop prospects are going to, soybeans in particular, are going to impact some plantings in the Mid-South. Now, ultimately, what many economists have privately told me is that they feel our number is probably a hair low. And they were saying this even before the bridge payment stuff was announced last week, which, by the way, bumped cotton prices upwards to the 68-cent range last week. So, yeah, a lot of variables. Luckily, we have got one such economist ready to join us right now. Without further ado, let's bring in Mr. Darren Hudson, the Combest Endowed Chair at Texas Tech's Davis College of Ag Sciences and Natural Resources. Wow. That's a mouthful, Darren.
It is a mouthful, Beck, I'm telling you.
I hope I got it all right.
You only got one title. I've got like 4. So, but yeah, no, that's great. Because you'd spend the whole show reciting all that nonsense.
I noticed that, I had my pick of titles.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, I had a chance to hear Darren speak a month ago back at the NPE Summit down in Fort Lauderdale. And he also held court again last week at the Beltwide Conferences in San Antonio. And I figured, hey, it's probably time to let my audience hear all of this knowledge that Darren has been dropping at these meetings. And so, yeah, without further ado, Darren, welcome to the Cotton Companion podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I tell you what, just to dive right in, Darren, I have been discussing our acreage projection, which we released last week. Cotton grower, after doing our annual acreage survey, is projecting 9,005,000 acres. To be specific, that's upland and ELS in the U.S. in 2026. I wonder, do you have a number in your mind, as many economists do, that you are expecting as far as cotton acreage here in the States in 2026?
Well, like any good economist, the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
But we often look at the historical corn cotton ratio, price ratio as an indicator. It's a rough indicator, but it's an indicator this early in the season. And consistently, that ratio predicts about 10.2 million acres total, all cotton. And that's not because cotton price is great. It's because corn price isn't any better, right? And so both of them are in horrible shape. Though cotton, seen a bit of a bump in the last week and a half, and that helps a little bit. But when we get down, to the brass tacks, I mean, I think there's sort of a fixed amount that happens because of rotation, right? We're just growing it because we're in an agronomic rotation, and we're not going to get out of that, right? That doesn't change much. But that's probably 4.5, 5 million acres is sort of locked into that rotation. Then you get into the decision acres, which you call it, and where you see the most flex, obviously, is the Southeast, Mid-South, right? So that's where producers have better alternatives, that they can go to if they don't want to grow cotton. Infrastructure exists, things like that. High Plains, we're going to plant 3.5 million acres. That's just what it is. We might hit 4.5 million acres if you get some price recovery. So I tend to think 10.2 is sort of the upper bound, and it's probably 9.6 to 9.8 planted. If you get a nice rally here and you hit a 7 in front of the price going into the insurance discovery period, you might pick up a few more acres, especially with it being dry, in the coastal bend area and the High Plains. They'll plant those acres because the price will, they'll get it back on abandoned acres. But so I sort of see where you guys are at as, where we were in December, and probably a realistic bottom end of that number. Upper end of that number is probably 9.6, 9.8. We could go to 10, if conditions are right. But so it's probably going to have a 9 in front of it for sure.
Yeah. It's very important that when I talk about our acreage survey, I include the caveat that we were asking the question between mid-November and mid-December. And as always happens, as soon as I hit publish on the story, things happen. And in this case, it was Farmer Bridge Assistance got announced with the good number by the cotton acre, $117 per acre. And then the announcement came out of China that they were reducing acreage, and it's like, it just makes me want to slam this desk over.
Yeah.
The second I publish a number,
the other sort of unknown, right, is what Brazil does, right?
Yeah.
Because cotton's second crop, they're really late because they didn't have any moisture, and growing season wise, that favors corn over cotton, just the length of the growing season. Like estimates we heard at the Beltwide was anywhere from 5 to 10% fewer acres in Brazil, and that might be reflected in what we're seeing in the price right now. But certainly, the conditions became a little more bearish after you guys a little bit more bullish after you guys published the survey. But it's still, where we're at in prices, it's an 80-cent cost of production. So, we're in the worst possible position, in the high 60s, because that limits payments, payment potential on the crop, limits the insurance value. And so, you're stuck in those 60s, where if cotton price was 40 cents, you're still going to get 70 cents by the time you get all the payments. So I don't tend to think that there's a huge upside there from where you guys are, but maybe 500,000 acres, 500,000 to 800,000 acres.
I tell you, I appreciate that, Darren. I like to be inch perfect. I like to be within 10 acres if I can, and
Yeah.
that's never happened, and it dang sure ain't gonna happen this year. That's all right. Let me move forward. I got a sidetracked on my obsession, which is that acreage number, but I want to talk to you about the thing that I've heard you speak on. As I said, I heard you down in Fort Lauderdale back in mid-December, and the speech that you were giving was generally about how tariffs have this outsized, they grab the headlines on
Right.
what's happening on the farm these days, and it seemed like what you were trying to highlight was that maybe they are not the factor that they have been made out to be, and what you kept. And we're going to get to that one in a second, so hold off on your tariff stuff. But let me just say, you were pointing us towards these more kind of long-term fundamental indicators, things like yearly global consumption trends and the battle for market share with man-made fibers. Can you talk a little bit about those indicators and how they have contributed to the position that we find ourselves in today, which is with this lingering tight trading window in a bearish market?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's important to remember, it sort of historically, if you look back, the 70s, 80s, up through that period, we had rapid growth in cotton consumption globally. We were growing 2-3% per year. Since early 2000s, it's been essentially zero, right? We were spending 115 million bales in 2000. We're spending 115 million bales in 2025, right? Plus or minus, a few million bales. So global demand just has not increased at all. And what that does is, the entry of Brazil and growth in Brazil, Australia, the US. What that means is we end up fighting over whatever is left in that market. China and India aren't small producers. So, that window of opportunity becomes very, very narrow for any kind of price growth because you don't have any demand growth. And, I think one of the charts I put up was looking, we produce our annual forecasts, talk to Congress, other groups, but if you just took the 0% growth and forecasted it out over the next 10 years, there's virtually no growth in price, like just none, right? If you just had 1% growth in annual consumption, like half of where we were, prior, that's a 10-cent differential, right? So, you see 10-cent price growth over that window with just marginal increases. And so, if you look at where we are, if you go back to the 70s, cotton was roughly globally about 40% of fiber use. Today, we're at 23% of fiber use. And so man-made fibers has just been growing and growing and growing, and cotton has not. And so we're there. And the number I like to say is that, if we're at 23% use and we went just to 25% fiber share globally, that's an additional 11 to 14 million bales of consumption. That's the entire U.S. crop, right? And so, even just fractional changes in global demand are going to have potentially huge impacts for U.S. producers. So it sets us up, the pie's not growing, right? So we're not spending more bales. So that means the bales that are produced are fighting for that share. And Brazil's growing, right? So they're adding more and more cotton to the mix every year. And so that means there's a shrinking share for the U.S. market. And that's really where we're at, is we just don't have any reason. There's no market-driven reason to drive those prices higher.
Yeah. A side note there, I can remember being in Joe Nicosia's speeches at the Memphis Gin Show. He gives an economic update the beginning of those shows. I mean, this is like maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago when he first started banging the drum about Brazil and how they were going to outpace us in exports. And I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't understand why that should be important to, like, why do growers care that they're exporting more than us? But what I'm hearing you say is that because of man-made fibers, cotton is getting a smaller piece of the pie.
Yeah.
And when you have a competitor who's ramping up, their competition against you for the smaller piece of the pie, yeah, that's going to hurt.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I like to say, look, if we were growing at 1% mill use per year, I don't care what Brazil does at that point. We can't grow enough cotton, right? By the end of a 5 or 10 year horizon, we're back to 90 cents, and we're buying lots of acres away from corn and beans just to meet that demand. And but with no growth, yeah, they can produce it at 60 cents. We produce it at 80 cents. They're gonna capture some of that market and take it away from us. That's what Joe's point was, though he probably was a little less blunt about it, but that's really what's happening.
Yeah. It's safe to say I fundamentally misunderstood what he was trying to tell me. This is Ole Miss. You got to say it slow, man. You got to speak slow to us Ole Miss journalists in the office, in the audience. Okay. You kind of touched on a lot of what I was going to ask you there. Let's switch to those tariffs. It seems like, as I said, they certainly grab headlines. There's politically charged connotations when we're talking about tariffs and their impact on the farm. And I'm not saying that I don't think you are saying that they are totally absolved from situations that happen across all crops. But with cotton specifically, in your research, have you found that the tariffs have impacted this bear market that we have struggled with really since early 2025, maybe before that?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's important to distinguish between tariffs in two ways. One is outbound, right? So retaliatory tariffs that exist and things like that on U.S. cotton being exported. That hasn't affected us much, in large part because cotton was, unlike soybeans, cotton was already diversified in its export market. So China's not the big dog. I mean, it's big, but it's not the big dog. Vietnam, Bangladesh, other places like that import more U.S. cotton than China does. And those places don't have those retaliatory tariffs. So we didn't, the Chinese slapping retaliatory tariffs didn't really impact cotton near, not zero, but near to the extent it did with beans and corn and other, major commodities. The other side of the tariff, though, is so inbound tariffs on things like, fertilizer, potash, nitrogen, that kind of stuff. Its impact on equipment prices through steel, its impact on, other things. I would say what that's done is held input prices up higher than, they would be in this situation, because the input prices would need to come down, because you're just planting fewer acres and things like that. But those prices have stayed up in part because of tariffs, not completely, but in part because of tariffs. So I don't think it's that. And then for us, the interesting part is that when you look at our imports, apparel imports, we slapped tariffs on imports, and imports actually went up, right? Year over year, compared, seasonally adjusted, imports actually rose. So the draw effect of bringing cotton back, right? So the demand pull, cotton going out to be made into garments and coming back as finished goods, that flow doesn't seem to be impacted by tariffs much at all, right? It's hard to say zero, but it doesn't seem to be impacted much at all. So, I would say cotton is probably, on the input side, has been hammered by the tariffs. But on the output side, not so much. I mean, I don't think the tariffs have really, I don't think that's the cause of what we see the bearish market to be. I think that's the macro fundamentals that we talked about, demand and competition from Brazil and, other kinds of things that really are keeping us locked in this trading range.
Personal curiosity here, Darren, because I find myself thinking about the difference in this round of trade saber rattling and tariff stuff that goes on. And back in 2018, 2019, when we were doing trade war with China,
right?
Is this situation, or is cotton in a different scenario this time around? I know you mentioned diversity in export destination being like a reason that it doesn't just like immediately impact the price of
Right.
cotton when we are having disruption with China. Was that the case in 2018 and 19 too?
Well, the cotton was more directly impacted 2018, 2019. A larger share of our cotton was going to China at that point, so that had an impact. It did two things. One is cotton was already diversifying its export markets, and we could talk for an hour why that was occurring, going to Vietnam, Bangladesh, other places. But it was already diversifying that, and so that accelerated that process. So that Trump 1.0 accelerated that diversification. But the other thing that the result of what we're seeing is what China did was it moved away from U.S. cotton to Brazilian cotton. And so it went and invested heavily in commercial infrastructure in Brazil. And so once those commercial ties get bound up, they're hard to break, right? It's hard to break with price, especially since we're more expensive than Brazilian cotton anyway, better quality, but more expensive. And so what Trump 1.0 did was create a sort of a structural shift that favored Brazil in cotton. And so on the one side, we were worse off in Trump 1.0, which ultimately made us a little more resilient under Trump 2.0, right? But at the same time, Trump 1.0 probably created some advantages for Brazil that we're feeling today, right, in this bearish market that we're talking about. So, there are lots of moving parts, and I think it's sort of complex to think about. But I think Trump, cotton is in a better position on those tariffs now than they were before, but we've now got more competition in the international market that we have to face, probably as a result of Trump 1.0.
Very good, very good. Last one, Darren, and then I'll let you get out of here. I'm going to ask you to put on your soothsayer, your crystal ball here. Do you believe we're going to be breaking out of this tight trading window, this 60-cent range-bound window that's got us all feeling a little claustrophobic in 2026? Here, it's mid-January. We got a long year ahead of us. Do you think that maybe we could break out of it here in the coming year?
Yes. Well, I put it this way. Of course, if I knew what the answer to that question was, I'd be drinking, pina coladas in Tahiti and not talking to you. But, the prognostication is, I think there's more upside potential in this market than there is downside potential, right? I don't think we're going to the 50s. We're much more likely in the high 70s, low 80s. But I think there's a bit of risk, and this is what the big discussion at the Beltwide, right, is let's say we plant a bunch of acres because it's dry in West Texas, South Texas, other places, just thinking it's going to plant, we're going to abandon it, it goes away, right? But, if you look at the INSO data, right, we're heading into a neutral phase. And then could be, depending on the timing, you could get a lot more rain in the summer. It's kind of scheduled for fall at this point, but it could move back into July, right? Well, if it moves back into July, you got a bunch of acres. Let's say you plant 10.2 million acres, right? And instead of abandoning 35%, you abandon 15%. Now, the markets are sitting out there looking and saying, oh, wait a minute, now we got a lot more cotton. And so if it runs up to that 75, 80 cents, thinking we're going to be short because of Brazil, because of China, because of, bad weather in the U.S., and all of a sudden it looks like we're going to turn a crop, you could see some downside move in that market. So, I think just be aware, if you're a producer, just be aware. And if you get up in that range and you can lock some in, you lock some in. But, that's a lot of ifs and buts and, and all that other stuff. But to say that I think we've got more upside potential in this market than we do downside is seems to be what the consensus is. The other thing that's happening, which I think is interesting, is if you look at the commitment of traders, I mean, it's heavy short, right? There's a lot, and at some point this has got to be bought back, right? So some of this has got to be bought back, so that there is potential for rallies, and we're starting to see some of the hedge funds sort of slowly back out of their short positions, which might indicate again there's the potential for a run, out of this mid 60s range that we've been stuck in, but I just I just tell producers all the time, you price based on what you think you can get, not what you hope to get, right? Hope's not a plan, it's not a strategy. And if it's at 80 and you don't automatically think it's going to 90, right? You always be able to protect yourself, whether it's with, put options at points or whatever. Take advantage of those rallies when they happen, because until we get sustained growth in mill use, there's not a lot of floor underneath that price. That floor is not weak, or is not very strong. So, if you get up there, put a floor in.
Very good. Sound advice, Darren. Man, it is always a pleasure talking to you. I thank you so much. For those in the audience, just as an FYI, I gave Darren less than 24 hours notice that we needed a guest, and he said, bring it on. He was happy to do it. So
yeah,
always gracious and a frequent guest of this podcast, and I hope that you will continue to join us, sir. Thank you, and you have a happy and prosperous new year.
You as well, Beck.
So, all right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Cotton Companion podcast. We want to say thanks again to Darren Hudson of Texas Tech University for spending some time with us today. And thanks too to our sponsors, Bayer and their Delta Pine brand cottonseed. As always, we want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us and for your continuing support. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And if you did like what you've heard, please be sure to spread the word and tell your farming friends and neighbors about the Cotton Companion podcast. Here's where and how they can find us.
You can find the Cotton Companion in 3 easy ways. First, go to cottongrower.com/companion, or simply click the podcast tab at the top of the homepage. Second, subscribe to our channel on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts these days. And 3, sign up for our weekly e-newsletter, the Cotton Grower e-News, that's delivered to your email inbox every Tuesday morning. You can do that by going to cottongrower.com/subscribe. Also, be sure to follow Cotton Grower on social media. We are at Cotton Grower Mag on Twitter. And on Facebook, you'll find us by searching for Cotton Grower Magazine.
The Cotton Companion podcast is produced by Mr. Tyler Hatch and Miss Kim Henderson, our talented colleagues at the world headquarters for Meister Media Worldwide in lovely Willoughby, Ohio. My name is Beck Barnes, and I will be back with you in a few weeks with the next episode of The Cotton Companion. Until then, kick those feet up, give it a rest. You've earned it.
'Cause God made me a farmer. Yeah, he works and he works and he works and he works all